Einstein was often called the brain of the century, transforming our worldview and merging a turbulent life with monumental achievements. In Einstein, a biography, author Jürgen Neffe draws from newly uncovered documents and surprising archival materials to tell the story of Einstein and his era. Neffe reveals hidden facets of the Einstein myth and explains Einstein's scientific theories in an accessible way, helping readers grasp the practical significance and timeless humanism in his ideas. In this video, you'll learn about Einstein's life, scientific achievements, and groundbreaking theories. We'll also explore the lasting influence of his ideals on today's world. The book's author, Jürgen Neffe, holds a Ph.D. in biochemistry and has been a journalist for over 20 years, working as a correspondent, columnist, and New York-based reporter for Der Spiegel. He later established the Max Planck Society's office in Berlin, where he served as director and joined the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science. Now he lives in Berlin as a freelance journalist. Hello everyone, and welcome to BookSpark. This channel is all about sharing insights from great books. We share at least 3 book summaries each week, so don't forget to subscribe. If you'd like a copy of this video's script, you can find the download link below for free. Let's dive into Einstein. After reading it, I felt incredibly inspired, and I can't wait to share it with you all. I think this is especially powerful for kids to hear about Einstein's journey, as it might plant a seed of curiosity and love for truth. So today, I'm truly excited to recommend this book to everyone. To start our discussion on Einstein, a biography, let's begin with his passing. Einstein passed away on April 18, 1955. After his death, his body was taken for an autopsy conducted by Dr. Thomas Harvey, who found the cause of death, a ruptured abdominal aneurysm, a matter that had garnered worldwide attention. In a sudden moment of inspiration, Dr. Harvey decided to preserve Einstein's brain. Without informing anyone or seeking any authorization, he sawed open Einstein's skull and took the entire brain home. Even more strangely, Einstein's ophthalmologist quickly took both of Einstein's eyes after his death, keeping them as personal artifacts. If you ask these people why they kept parts of Einstein's body, they'd say it was because Einstein was already seen as a kind of saint. People had elevated him to a scientific pedestal in ways that were oddly unscientific, an irony in itself. So why is Einstein so remarkable? One key year stands out, 1919. It's often called Einstein's second birth year. He was born in 1879, so by 1919 he was 40. What happened that year? In 1905, Einstein had published his special theory of relativity, and a few years later he released the general theory of relativity. In general relativity, Einstein made a bold prediction. We don't stand on Earth because of gravity, but because large masses distort the surrounding field, bending light and time, leading us to move along the shortest paths in curved geometry. Imagine this. Because the sun is so massive, it warps the space around it, creating something like a bowl. Not a real bowl, but a force field. Stars and planets move along the edges of this bowl, which explains why they don't crash into the sun. Traditional gravitational theory might suggest that if the Earth and the Moon were pulled together by gravity, a nudge could disrupt this balance and either pull the Moon closer or push it away. But that's not what happens. Einstein showed that gravity, as we traditionally thought of it, doesn't actually exist. What exists is a warp in space-time. How could he prove something that sounded so abstract? Einstein said, "If I'm right, then all light passing near the sun should bend, and I can calculate the exact angle of this bending." He did the math and predicted a deviation of 1.7 arcseconds. For years, no one could prove it. Finally, in 1919, a total solar eclipse provided the perfect opportunity. Many scientists worldwide set out to observe Einstein's predicted light-bending effect. Among them was Arthur Eddington, whose measurements aligned almost precisely with Einstein's prediction. This discovery launched Einstein to new heights, and at 40, he became a global icon. I'm sure many of you wonder how Einstein came up with such strange yet accurate theories. Let's take a look at his early life. Albert Einstein was born on March 14, 1879, in Ulm, Germany. As a child, he was a late talker. Unlike most kids who would pick up words one by one, Einstein would quietly rehearse entire sentences to himself before finally speaking aloud. Some kids are like that. They won't say incomplete thoughts or single words. This trait may have contributed to stories about Einstein being slow as a child. But he was anything but slow. Einstein was extremely intelligent, excelled in school, and had a notoriously bad temper. Between the ages of 4 and 7, he even broke his nanny's nose several times. He was incredibly stubborn and had a unique personality. Other kids didn't like playing with him because they found him too absent-minded and eccentric. Einstein's most defining trait was his love of reading, especially books others avoided. Do you know when he read Kant's Critique of Pure Reason? He finished it by age 13, a daunting work that I still can't bring myself to complete. Reading such challenging philosophical works drove Einstein to seek consistency and rigorous logic in his later scientific pursuits. He had a unique approach to scientific research, especially excelling in physics, driven by an innate curiosity. As adults, we tend to lose interest in things like the stars, focusing instead on the stock market, making money, and starting businesses. But Einstein said that he was fascinated by stars as a child and kept that fascination as he grew older. He wanted to understand how the stars moved and uncover the laws of the universe, holding onto a childlike sense of wonder. In another sense, this also shows that Einstein never really grew up. He struggled in his relationships with his wives and children, suggesting he lacked maturity in handling personal matters. Yet he maintained a youthful curiosity, blending this with his remarkable abilities in physics to become the Einstein we know. Some may attribute his success to pure talent, but as discussed in books like Peak and the Nature of Genius, it's not just innate talent, it's also the environment in which a child grows up. Do you know what Einstein's parents did? His father and uncle ran a company named Einstein & CA. So when Einstein later encountered theories from scientists like Maxwell and Lorentz, he wasn't starting from scratch. He had grown up around engineers. His father, uncle, and even his mother's family were passionate about science and engineering. In high school, Einstein was a particularly interesting student who often challenged his teachers. One teacher even said that Einstein's presence undermined his authority in the classroom. Einstein disliked his school's strict militaristic structure, feeling it stifled individuality. He asked to take a leave, claiming poor health, and the teacher happily signed off, eager to see him go. Einstein graduated early from high school and attempted to enter the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich, but didn't pass. However, the school's physics professor allowed him to attend lectures, as he'd never seen a high school student so advanced in physics. After a year, Einstein reapplied and was accepted in October 1896, where he met his future wife, Mileva Maric, who was also in his class. Mileva was an extraordinary woman. Few women attended college at that time, especially in technical fields. Einstein wrote many passionate love letters to her, which later became artifacts of historical and scientific interest. At the start, he was intensely romantic, writing letters that could make you blush. His parents opposed the marriage, feeling it was unsuitable, but Einstein was determined. They had a daughter before marriage, whose fate remains a mystery. Some believe she died young or was placed in someone else's care. Einstein struggled to find work, suspecting that an old professor he'd antagonized was working against him. He remarked, "If it weren't for Weber's sneaky sabotage, I'd probably already have a position." With few options left, he finally secured a job at the Swiss Patent Office, working long hours, 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. Many assume Einstein's work at the Patent Office was beneath him, that he was just biding his time before diving into research at night. But his work was far from a waste. He reviewed countless scientific inventions, studying new discoveries and patent applications daily. This job offered him incredible exposure to fresh ideas and became a valuable source of learning and inspiration. while working in Bern, Einstein posted a job ad offering physics tutoring. Though he didn't gain any students, he did make two lifelong friends, Maurice Solovine and Conrad Habit. These two, both students, saw Einstein's ad and reached out, drawn to his love of physics. The three formed a reading group, ambitiously dubbing it the Olympia Academy. They met regularly to discuss and study, and while they called it an academy, it remained a trio until their deaths, a testament to their remarkable friendship. Their study group focused on works by figures like Ernst Mach, who wrote The Analysis of Sensations, along with notable philosophers like David Hume and Henri Poincaré. They also explored classic literature, including Antigone by Sophocles. Einstein relentlessly pursued cutting-edge scientific research until his death, constantly striving toward scientific discovery. He never concerned himself with fame or setbacks, nor did he worry about others' opinions. Literature, too, played a formative role in his life and worldview, underscoring the importance of the humanities in shaping a person. In 1905, let's do the math. How old was Einstein? 26. That year, while still working at the patent office, became known as Einstein's miracle year. Why? Because at just 26, he published 21 papers in physics, 5 of which were groundbreaking, including his paper on special relativity, the early concepts of quantum mechanics, and his explanation of the photoelectric effect. Interestingly, it was the paper on the photoelectric effect, not special relativity, that earned him the Nobel Prize. So, what happened in Einstein's miracle year? This brings us to the core of the book. What is special relativity? The concept of relativity builds on Newton's 3 laws of motion, and as Newton famously said, he was standing on the shoulders of giants, the foremost being Galileo, who first proposed the idea of relative motion. We learned in school about relative speeds. For instance, if a train moves at 60 kilometers per hour in one direction and another train at 40 kilometers per hour in the opposite direction, their relative speed is 100 kilometers per hour. This concept of relative motion forms one of the pillars of relativity. The second pillar? The constancy of the speed of light. Nothing moves faster than light. Early on, scientists discovered slight time lags in satellite signals, which allowed them to calculate the speed of light with impressive accuracy, approximately 300,000 kilometers per second. This speed limit is universal, making light speed the fastest constant in the universe. So these two principles, relative motion and constant light speed, are the foundation. But Einstein, with his background in philosophy and keen analytical skills, posed a problem. What if a light beam traveled at 70% of the speed of light towards something else moving at 60% of the speed of light? The relative speed between them would seemingly be 130% of light speed. Which principle breaks down, constant light speed or relative motion? Most people would throw their hands up here saying, it's just a rule, don't question it. But Einstein thought, this is a problem. The whole structure collapses if our foundation is unstable. And he began to ponder it. One day in 1905, the story goes, it was a beautiful day, and Einstein suddenly had a revelation. To understand his insight, remember that trains were the fastest mode of transportation then, so they served as common examples for thought experiments. Einstein said, imagine someone dribbling a basketball on a moving train. For the person on the train, the ball moves straight up and down. However, for someone standing beside the train, the ball's path appears zigzagged as it moves along with the train. The zigzag path is longer than the straight up and down path because the two sides of a triangle are always longer than the base. So, to an observer on the ground, the basketball takes a longer path, even though the time remains the same. How could the same basketball take both a shorter and a longer path simultaneously? Einstein's answer was the concept of time dilation. Time dilation means that the clock on the moving train runs slower than a stationary clock. That's why Einstein's theory was called relativity. It opposed Newton's absolute framework. Newton's mechanics held that two things are constant in the universe: time and space. Time ticks along uniformly, moving at the same rate for everyone, and space is ever present, even if all matter disappears. This was a foundational idea in Newtonian physics. Einstein argued that if we're to reconcile relative motion with constant light speed, time itself must change. It must be relative. On a fast-moving train, time stretches out, meaning the clock ticks more slowly. Today, when we look at the sun, we're actually seeing it as it was 8 minutes ago, because that's how long it takes for sunlight to reach Earth. Similarly, when we look at distant stars, some may no longer exist, we're seeing into the past. Time and space can transform into one another. The breakthrough in special relativity hinges on this concept. If you think back to that basketball on the train, it's clear. From a stationary perspective, the ball's path is longer than the straight path observed on the train itself. What happens if you go even faster? At light speed, time would stop entirely. Here's an interesting analogy. Einstein described time as the fourth dimension. Imagine an ant moving in a three-dimensional space with a fixed travel distance, say 1 meter. If it climbs half a meter vertically, it will travel half a meter less on the horizontal plane. Now, if we add a fourth dimension, time, you'll see that if we travel more in time, we travel less in distance and vice versa. This is a crucial conclusion of special relativity. Right now, sitting here, which dimension is passing for us? That's right, only time. You're aging at a constant rate, moving uniformly forward in time. If you went for a run, you might age a little less, but only if you were moving at a significant speed. Now, if you hopped in a rocket and flew at 1/3 the speed of light, you'd watch us age rapidly while you stayed young. This was the impact of special relativity when it was introduced. As someone noted, by starting from the simplest kinematic observations, Einstein reshaped our concept of space and time. Because time is essential to any physical theory, some peers believed he'd opened a Pandora's box, as all theories would now need to align with relativity. Einstein had, through space-time, opened a new scientific frontier that others would follow and make significant discoveries within. Einstein soon followed up with his famous formula, E is equal to mc squared. Why is this formula so remarkable? In just 5 elegant symbols, Einstein revealed the relationship between mass and energy. After writing it, he famously remarked that the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. The simplicity and beauty of this equation revealed such a profound relationship. This formula also hinted at the massive potential of nuclear fission, later realized in the explosion of the atomic bomb. To put this in perspective, a 100-watt incandescent light bulb consumes less than 0.003 grams of mass over 100 years, transforming a tiny bit of mass into a significant amount of light energy. Now compare that with the sun. The sun burns vast amounts of matter to provide us with energy, transforming millions of tons of mass into radiant energy every second, enabling life on Earth. On July 20, 1905, Einstein and his wife had a rare night of heavy drinking. This was the only time Einstein drank to excess, and that night, he sent a historically notable postcard to his friend and academic colleague Conrad Habit, writing, "Unfortunately, 2 completely drunk people have crawled under the table, my poor tailbone and my wife." This marked the start of Einstein's academic career, and by the fall of 1909, he finally achieved the title of professor. Before this, Einstein briefly held an unpaid lecturer position at the University of Bern. It's hard to imagine a job where you're allowed to lecture but without pay. He taught for a few months to small audiences, mostly friends, and eventually quit due to lack of students. His start in teaching was rocky, and his nerves sometimes got the better of him. However, he began a new tradition. After class, he would take students to a cafe to continue discussions. For Einstein, it wasn't just about teaching for exams, but genuinely exploring physics together. Soon, he became a sought-after figure, thanks to Max Planck, one of the first to recognize Einstein's brilliance. Let's talk about the Solvay conferences. Ernest Solvay, a wealthy Belgian industrialist, organized an elite conference bringing together the world's top physicists to discuss pressing scientific questions. The first Solvay conference was held in October 1911, creating a tradition. Einstein joined some of the greatest minds in physics. While this initial conference didn't yield groundbreaking scientific conclusions, it introduced Einstein to an entirely different intellectual circle. Do you know who attended that first Solvay conference? There was a Dutchman whom Einstein deeply admired, calling him a living work of art, Hendrik Lorentz, an expert in electromagnetism. Other attendees included Max Planck, Marie Curie, Ernest Rutherford, the discoverer of the atomic nucleus, and Henri Poincaré. This conference marked a significant turning point. At just 32, Einstein had ascended to the Olympus of physics, joining the scientific elite in a global gathering unmatched in intellectual caliber and collaborative spirit. Eventually, people in Berlin realized Einstein's significance and offered him an exceptional position with an annual salary of 12,000 marks. The offer came with a unique condition. He had no job commitments. He could do whatever he wanted. If he wanted to do research, great. If not, that was fine too. It was an irresistible offer, along with the title of academician, inviting him to Berlin. Einstein thought it over and decided to accept. He wrote to someone, describing the position as like being a mummy, where he essentially had no duties. He felt the offer was simply too good to refuse. This brings up a point worth mentioning. For scientists and top professors, we should aim to give them respect and freedom. Ordinary people can't dictate what they should think about or study. Today, people often feel that the work produced by university professors lacks quality because it's more about quantity. How many papers are published, how many students are supervised, and so on. Professors often lack sufficient autonomy and self-respect and end up fulfilling minimum requirements just to meet quotas, wasting much of their time on bureaucracy. By contrast, Einstein's position in Berlin required him to do nothing at all. He could give a lecture if he wanted or not at all. This allowed him to move to Berlin, marking a stable point in his career path until he eventually transitioned to Princeton in the US. After arriving in Berlin, Einstein experienced personal tragedy. A major reason for moving to Berlin was reconnecting with his cousin Elsa, with whom he'd been close since childhood. She was married in Berlin and had 2 daughters. After Einstein arrived, his relationship with Elsa rekindled, and they grew very close, exchanging many affectionate letters. At this point, he became increasingly distant from his wife, who had joined him in Berlin with their 2 sons. His marriage deteriorated amid constant arguments, and he also had a troubled relationship with his sons. His elder son was fairly ordinary, while his younger son, Eduard, suffered from severe mental illness and spent much of his life in a psychiatric hospital. In essence, Einstein had few close family connections. A curious detail about his divorce stands out. Einstein wrote to his wife, Mileva, saying he would give her his Nobel Prize money as part of the settlement, along with regular alimony payments. The amusing part? He hadn't yet won the Nobel Prize. He was so confident that he included the Nobel Prize money in the divorce terms, fully expecting to win it someday. Sure enough, he later won the prize and honored his commitment, giving the money to Mileva. His life was filled with conflicts over finances, relationships, and family matters, often tied to other women. He openly stated that his main reason for going to Berlin was to be with Elsa and her daughters. This brings us to the transition from special relativity to general relativity. What's the difference between the two? Special relativity addresses relative motion in uniform, straight-line movement, as illustrated by the train example. But in real life, many motions involve acceleration. Gravity, for instance, is an accelerating force. Newton's formulas could explain phenomena on Earth well, but when applied to the cosmos, they started to fall short. One famous flaw in Newton's theory was in predicting Mercury's orbit. Historically, Newton's equations accurately predicted the orbits of all the planets except Uranus. When Uranus didn't match Newton's calculations, instead of questioning Newton, astronomers assumed there was another unseen planet affecting its orbit. They searched with telescopes and ultimately discovered Neptune, which validated Newton's theory by accounting for the irregularities in Uranus's position. However, Mercury's perihelion shift was still a problem. No amount of searching could find an explanation. Einstein realized that he needed to study accelerated motion since celestial bodies orbit with varying speeds. Max Planck warned him against it, saying no one would understand such a complex theory. But Einstein insisted, focusing on a principle he called the equivalence principle. This principle, which bears repeating here, reads, "For 200 years after Newton's death, no one could explain the precise equivalence between inertial mass and gravitational mass. Finally, someone questioned this coincidence: Einstein. In Newton's theory, there was one thing Einstein could never understand or accept. How is gravity transmitted? Light is the fastest thing, but gravity seemed to act even faster without delay or substance. It somehow connects two objects that aren't touching. What kind of force is that?" This question puzzled Einstein, so he began to think deeply about it. He devised an intriguing thought experiment. What would someone feel if they were falling freely from the sky without any reference points? When you fall, you notice it because you can see buildings rushing up and the ground approaching, which makes you scream. But what if there were no reference points? Einstein imagined a person in a closed elevator with no windows, falling freely. He reasoned that this person would float weightlessly inside, not feeling that they were falling. If they released a pen or feather, it would hover mid-air, just like them. This scenario mirrors the weightlessness we see in space. When astronauts are in free fall around the Earth, moving at high speeds, they feel no gravity. So Einstein boldly declared that gravity doesn't exist in the way we traditionally think. While you may feel gravity holding you to your chair, Einstein argued it's an illusion. If gravity were real, then heavier objects would fall faster than lighter ones, but they don't. They both follow what he called the geodesic, or shortest path in a curved space. This concept comes from the field of differential geometry, developed by mathematicians like Riemann and Gauss. Their work showed that the shortest distance between 2 points on a curved surface is not a straight line but a curved path called a geodesic. The Earth's large mass creates a force field that curves the space around it, guiding everything along these shortest paths. If there were no ground, we would keep following these paths downward. The Sun, as a massive body near Earth, bends light through this curved space, and objects like black holes have even stronger effects. How did Einstein come up with the idea of light bending? He did another thought experiment. He imagined a beam of light passing through a small hole across a freely falling elevator. As the elevator falls, the light hits the opposite wall slightly higher than expected, curving as it falls behind the accelerating elevator. To an observer in the elevator, the light appears bent. Since acceleration and gravity are equivalent, gravity must bend light in the same way. This meant that massive bodies must cause light to deflect, a prediction of general relativity long before he finalized its equations. By 1919, Einstein's calculations matched the observed bending angle of starlight passing near the Sun, marking his rise to fame. But there was a major hurdle. Einstein's calculations repeatedly came up wrong, frustrating him as he presented results that ultimately failed. The issue? His mathematical skills were limiting him. Desperate, he wrote to his friend Marcel Grossmann, asking for help, admitting he understood the physics but couldn't compute it. Grossmann, a skilled mathematician, helped Einstein refine the equations, leading to their joint publication on general relativity. An earlier paper by Einstein titled Outline of a Generalized Theory of Relativity had errors because he hadn't fully developed the correct formulas. Einstein, with general relativity, easily dismissed one of the universe's most mysterious forces, gravity. Today, we understand that gravity, as traditionally conceived, doesn't exist. There's no force directly pulling two objects toward each other. Instead, the curvature of space-time, shaped by the mass within it, dictates the paths objects take. Since large masses curve space, the gravitational field around them influences how objects move within it. In essence, the mass of large objects like the Sun creates a space around them that curves, affecting everything within that warped space. Einstein's approach was very different from Newton's. Newton created calculus as a mathematical tool for his theories, while Einstein, with more limited mathematical skills, used the field equations developed by Maxwell and Lorentz. He applied electromagnetic field equations to calculate the gravitational field across the universe, which ultimately allowed him to explain Mercury's orbit near the Sun accurately. When scientists observed this, they found that his predictions matched reality, confirming Einstein's theory once again. Mass is energy, clustering to change space-time geometry, and all objects move through space-time along geodesics, following the shortest paths unless an external force acts upon them, such as a rocket engine or an obstacle like Earth's surface. Beyond the predefined structure of space-time, there's no additional force. In this view, we must grow accustomed to a world without gravity as a separate force. We aren't held here by gravity, but by geodesics. This also explains why objects in free fall experience no effect of mass on their rate of descent and fall at the same speed, as Galileo discovered. This is because the curvature acts uniformly on everything, regardless of mass. This relationship is evident in weightlessness. If an astronaut floats away from a whooshing space station in orbit, even though they weigh much less than the station, they stay beside it, both following the same geodesic. According to traditional gravity formulas, their speeds should differ, yet they don't. This was Einstein's elegant answer to the mysteries of the universe. Now, regarding general and special relativity, you might wonder about the practical applications of such theories. Here's how it has changed our world. In school, we learned that light behaves as a wave, much like water waves that travel through water or sound waves that move through air. But light also propagates through the vacuum of space, which led scientists to invent the term ether. However, no one has ever detected the presence of this so-called ether, and Einstein dismissed the idea entirely. Einstein also theorized gravitational waves in 1916. Just from his field equations, he concluded that gravitational waves could be generated by extreme changes in mass and gravity fields. Since then, scientists dreamed of detecting these cosmic tremors, and finally they did. Today, gravitational waves are a hot topic in physics, confirming Einstein's prediction over a century later. Einstein's development of general relativity solidified his status. No scholar in history had run a marathon alone. After completing one lap of revolutionary theory, they typically pass the baton to the next generation. Yet Einstein took the baton for a second lap with general relativity, continually pursuing new challenges. As he became a famous figure, political tensions also surfaced. Numerous critics began attacking relativity, some out of scientific differences, but largely due to anti-Semitism, which made Germany increasingly hostile for him. When one of his close friends, a Jewish foreign minister, was assassinated, and his fellow Nobel laureate chemist Fritz Haber, who had developed chemical weapons for Germany and WBY and converted from Judaism to Christianity, was ultimately forced out of Germany by the Nazis despite his efforts to belong to mainstream society. Appalled by the persecution of Jews, Einstein dedicated his later years to human equality and pacifism. A staunch pacifist, he even gave a controversial speech asserting that if just 2% of people refused military service, the world would achieve peace. He calculated that this small refusal rate would have a significant effect. This stance provoked backlash, ultimately leading him to flee to the United States. During his later years, Einstein became deeply involved in political activism. He had a surprising political savvy that contrasted with his childlike naivete in personal matters. He consistently opposed the Nazi regime, which ironically made him a divisive figure within the Jewish community. Some Jews criticized him, claiming that his opposition to the German government brought suffering upon them. They believed that his actions had worsened the persecution of Jews in Germany by refusing to placate the Nazi regime. When Einstein was in the United States, he never directly worked on the development of the atomic bomb, yet he felt a deep sense of guilt over it. Why? One day, Einstein was visited at home by scientists who warned him that the Germans were racing to build an atomic bomb. Fearful of the consequences, Einstein wrote to President Roosevelt, urging him to accelerate America's own atomic research. Although Einstein later claimed he had only signed the letter, he likely played a role in drafting it. Afterward, he felt that the eventual development and use of the atomic bomb were partly his responsibility. Ironically, he was never granted access to the core team working on the bomb. Some U.S. officials suspected him of espionage, which excluded him from the Manhattan Project's inner circle, where his friend Oppenheimer served as a leader. When McCarthyism later swept through America, even Oppenheimer faced imprisonment and investigation. Einstein rallied notable figures to write letters supporting Oppenheimer, but none of his colleagues at the Institute would sign the letters with him. During the McCarthy era, there was widespread persecution of communists and those suspected of communist sympathies, with even 2 scientists executed in the electric chair. This intense environment limited Einstein's influence in the U.S., but despite this, he never abandoned his dedication to scientific research. Another important area was Einstein's relationship with quantum mechanics. His work on the photoelectric effect introduced the idea of light as quantized packets of energy, quanta, which launched quantum mechanics and explained phenomena like the photoelectric effect and black-body radiation. This foundation paved the way for fields like microelectronics, mobile communication, digital imaging, computing, superconductivity, nanotechnology, modern chemistry, and lasers. Einstein discussed wave-particle duality, where light has properties of both waves and particles. Combining Planck's equation with as Planck's constant and as frequency and Einstein's, where as mass and is the speed of light, we see a relationship between frequency and mass, underscoring wave-particle duality. Our world therefore exists as both waves and particles. As quantum mechanics evolved, it challenged Einstein's belief in causality. He felt the universe, no matter how strange, should adhere to cause and effect. Each outcome must logically follow from a previous event. But quantum mechanics suggested a world with inherent randomness and unpredictability. To support Einstein, Schrödinger proposed the famous Schrödinger's cat thought experiment. Einstein appreciated this example, which demonstrated quantum superposition in a cat that could be dead or alive depending on an observer's measurement. If an object is thrown into the room with the cat's survival depends on whether the particle behaves as a wave or a particle, releasing poison only in the latter case. The cat's fate, therefore, hinges on whether we observe it or not. Einstein called this a powerful counterargument, declaring, "God does not play dice." To Einstein, suggesting God rolls dice to determine outcomes dismissed the universe's inherent order. Einstein strongly opposed Bohr and other physicists who embraced quantum mechanics' counterintuitive nature. Their intellectual duels resembled legendary clashes, with Bohr often coming out on top. Bohr once said with heartfelt respect, "We oppose Einstein with tears in our eyes." Bohr acknowledged that Einstein had opened the door to quantum mechanics, laying the groundwork, but felt that Einstein now lacked the courage to accept the strange nature of the quantum world. The quantum world remains bizarre, with phenomena like quantum entanglement, which defies explanation. Split a particle into 2, place one on one side of the Danube River and the other on the opposite bank, and if one particle changes, the other instantaneously mirrors it, even though they are separated by hundreds of meters. According to Einstein, this instantaneous effect defies causality. He argued, God does not play dice, believing everything should adhere to a clear cause and effect relationship. Reflecting later in life, Einstein remarked, "Perhaps my disregard for authority in youth made fate turn me into one." By his later years, he had become the established authority challenging younger scientists' progress. In his later years, Einstein left us a priceless legacy: peace. His enormous influence made him the most globally impactful non-political figure of his time. Initially, he opposed the idea of a Jewish state, but after witnessing the horrors inflicted on Jews in Germany, he changed his stance and supported the Zionist movement. He was friends with Israel's first president, Chaim Weizmann, and after Weizmann's death, Israel invited Einstein to become its president, a position he politely declined as he felt too old and unsuited for such a role, with only a few years left to live. Einstein also actively promoted equality, advocating for African American rights in the U.S. and opposing the proliferation of atomic weapons. A week before he died, Einstein signed his political testament alongside philosopher Bertrand Russell, warning governments and the world's people of the devastating risks of nuclear war, stating that a hydrogen bomb war could potentially annihilate humanity. The Russell-Einstein Manifesto laid the foundation for the next 50 years of peace efforts, particularly in opposing nuclear war and preventing the spread of nuclear weapons. The Pugwash movement, named after the manifesto's publication site, played a vital role in ensuring that the Cold War remained cold rather than turning into a hot nuclear conflict. Those of us alive today owe thanks to Einstein for this foundational declaration against nuclear weapons. But even great lives have a touch of sadness. In his later years, Einstein endured personal loss. His stepdaughter Ilse, whom he loved dearly and who served as his secretary, died in 1934. 2 years later, his beloved cousin Elsa passed away. When Elsa was near death, Einstein's outlook on life and death became clear. A friend noted that for Einstein, pain and joy were separated by a semicolon. In a letter to Max Born, he expressed this sentiment, writing, "My wife is gravely ill. I, on the other hand, am extremely happy here, finally able to enjoy truly peaceful days, a pleasure beyond words." Einstein was incredibly straightforward, and perhaps this showed his acceptance of life's inevitable cycles. He believed everyone must face their final days in solitude. Just a day or two before his own death, he was still joking with friends at the hospital, displaying a lightheartedness even when confronting his own mortality. What affected him most was not the loss of family, but the death of his longtime friend and fellow physicist, Michel Besso, on March 15, 1935. Besso had been a constant source of support, both during Einstein's personal and professional struggles. Their deaths left him increasingly isolated, and on April 18, 1955, Einstein himself passed away. His brain was infamously preserved in its entirety, a crude way to commemorate a man who brought such enlightenment to humanity. To close, let's remember Einstein's words to future generations. Dear future generations, if you are not more just, more peace-loving, and more reasonable than we are, then the devil will take over. With deep respect, I express my sincere hope here. Yours, Albert Einstein. This is the legacy he left us. If someone were to ask why I share a book like this, I would struggle to answer because the importance of Einstein is beyond words. He was a figure of greatness, a mind of purity, a person with a clean heart who never sought to oppress anyone, of course, with the exception of his marital strife. Politically, he always stood with the vulnerable, radiating light and warmth, tirelessly pushing the boundaries of human intellect and our understanding of the universe. Arguably, he was one of the greatest people in human history. My hope is that through learning about Einstein, we come to understand the spirit of science, inspiring us to contribute more truth, goodness, and beauty to this world. Thank you all, and see you with the next book.